Welcome to the Free Library of Philadelphia. My name is Jason Freeman, and I work here in the author events office. And I am excited to be here tonight to introduce Irvine Welsh. Called by The Guardian a, quote, genuinely, hauntingly transgressive navigator of underground realms of sex, drugs, and the Scottish working class, Irvine Welsh cooks up speedballs of kinetically subversive fiction laced with gritty vernacular and scalding social commentary. His first novel, Trainspotting, a mordantly funny portrait of the heroin-addicted fringe youth of 1980s Edinburgh, was adapted by Danny Boyle into a quintessential piece of British cinema. Mr. Welsh is also the author of more than a dozen other novels, including Ecstasy, Glue, Filth, Porno, and Skagboys, among other lasciviously titled books. He has also written several stage plays and screenplays, directed films in many genres, and has been involved in house music as a DJ, producer, and promoter. In his latest book, The Sex Lives of Siamese Twins, Mr. Welsh tells a grim story of Miami Beach posers and psychos, obsessive weight loss, abject codependency, and the media-driven transformation from hero to villain. Of course, this is in Florida. Ladies and gentlemen, won't you please join me in welcoming Irvine Welsh.
Hi, thanks very much for coming along, folks. I had a great time the last time I was in Philadelphia, and I went out to a couple of bars, and but this time actually I won't be because I stopped drinking at New Year, and temporarily, and but I went to Scotland for and I usually go to Scotland for a week before Christmas and New Year, but this time I kind of stupidly went for the whole month of December, so I feel that I kind of just I sort of drank all my kind of quota of alcohol for the rest of the year, and I've been trying to recover from that ever since. So I've decided, just to get I've got a few deadlines on scripts and books, so I've decided to take off January, February, and March. I've done January, I've made a start in February, so I don't know how I'm going to get on in March. It's going to be a tall order. But the book, The Sex Lives of Siamese Twins, it's a kind of departure book for me, and that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of reticent to read you a bit of it. The first thing you'll notice is different about it is that it's not just set in America, but it's set in America with American characters, and there are two narrators, Lucy Brennan, who's a fitness instructor, and her kind of nemesis, Lena, who's an artist, and who's an overweight artist who becomes her client. And it's basically about the relationship that these two women have with each other. Now, the first thing is, obviously they're a lot younger than me. Obviously they're women, and obviously they're American. And it was difficult enough to get their voices right for me, kind of on the page. So I'm very reticent about trying to read in their voices, as you can imagine. I don't know. It's like. My wife's American, so when I try to kind of do an American accent, she says that you sound like kind of John Wayne on tranquilizers when you try and do an American accent. And it's true, I've only got kind of one American accent, and it's just that kind of horrible kind of John Wayne-esque kind of, that kind of drawl that people, and it kind of just sounds silly, especially when you're trying to do, when you're trying to read is two young women characters. And it's a bit like you guys, when people in America do Scottish accents, they all sound like Groundskeeper Willie, And we did a movie, one of my books called Ecstasy, and it got quite a really big multiplex cinema release in Britain, and I was at the premiere, and it's a very busy packed house and all that, and everybody's looking forward to it. And I thought to myself, I was really worried about what happened was that we had to shoot it in Canada, and we had to use a lot of Canadian actors to do, and some of them were very good because some of them were kind of people who'd immigrated from Scotland, or their parents were Scottish, so they were part of that diaspora, and they got it. But there were, there are a lot of people, a lot of Canadians who thought they could do a Scottish accent, basically, and you can get away with one groundskeeper Willie in a film, but you can't get away with 2 or 3 or 4, So I knew this wasn't going to go well when the customs officer guy said to the main character, "Where have you been on holiday?" And the whole audience just started pissing themselves laughing, the whole Scottish audience, and I thought, oh my god. And he gets out, and then the taxi driver goes, "Where can I take you?" No, man, no. So I'm not going to I don't think I'm going to inflict it on you guys anyway. I might get a bit kind of sort of desperate sort of later on, because I want to open it up to a Q&A as soon as possible, so I can sort of I can have a little chat about the things you might want to talk about, rather than the things that I want to talk about. So, but the first thing I will say a little something about the book, that it kind of starts off with this terrible kind of incident that draws these 2 women together, that draws 2 women from very separate worlds into each other's world. And one of them is very sporty and one of them is very arty. And it kind of, I was trying, I think, to write about the dichotomy between sport and art in our kind of world, because when you think about it, when we grow up, I know that when I was growing up, I was crazy about sport. I loved playing sport. I loved playing football. I loved going to the boxing club, and I loved playing tennis. I loved everything that was to do with sport. But it was also very arty. I liked writing poems, and I liked kind of doing paintings and stuff like that. And because of that, I had 2 sets of friends, and who never really sort of got on with each other. I would kind of my kind of nerdy friends would go, "Oh, what are you doing hanging out with those meatheads? They're thick psychotic bullies and all that." And my kind of more jock kind of sort of buddies would just go, "What are you hanging out with these fucking poofs for? Fucking kill these bastards!" So it was like this always kind of made me feel kind of quite strange, that you had to pick the kind of the group that you hung around with, and you had to pick the activities that you did, and your peer group pressure sort of conditioned you so much into being one thing or the other. And I always thought that was a way, looking at the the way capitalism is, the way industrialization's taking place, and the division of labour, and I always thought that that was a way of kind of stopping people from becoming whole human beings, basically. Sort of to kind of to force them to specialize in something, to not be integrated. And I think that a lot of the problems that we face in life are trying to reach out and take on other interests and move into other areas that we feel that we've been kind of shut out of. And I was looking at it from the point of view of somebody who's so invested in sport, who's so invested in the notion of physical fitness and self-improvement through that physical fitness, and someone else who's thinks in a much more kind of thinks much more about the kind of world in terms of kind of aesthetics and in terms of politics, and somebody who lives much more in their head, basically. So I was thinking about how people in that position could get into a relationship that would be perhaps nourishing and sustaining for the both of them. So I came up with these 2 characters, and I did that by I was in this gym one time in Miami, this gym called Crunch Fitness, and because when I come to Miami, usually I've got a little place in Miami, and usually go there when it gets really cold in Chicago. And I'm conscious of the fact that it's like, because I never really take my clothes off in public, until I get to Miami, and then everybody's got no clothes on there. They're all walking around with no clothes, So I'll go and I'll get into my kind of my kind of standard sex offenders Miami uniform of kind of shorts and kind of tank top and flip flops, and I realise that I don't actually look like anybody else here because I've got this milk bottle Scottish white skin, and I've got this beer gut, and everybody else is all kind of tanned and buff and all that, and kind of very serious, and I like kind of sort of this mess that's just come out of this. So the first thing I do is I get to the gym and I sort of get to the boxing club, and I kind of work out like and I eat better. I eat fruit and vegetables there. You don't eat fruit and vegetables anywhere else. Anywhere that's not tropical, because they're crap. I mean, I realised that melon actually tastes quite nice. In Scotland it tastes like water. It tastes like frozen water because fruit apples don't taste like anything in Scotland. You can't you can't eat vegetables and fruit in Scotland. They shouldn't be called vegetables and fruit. In Chicago's a bit better, but not that much. So you suddenly go down to Miami and you have a glass of orange juice and you think, this actually tastes like a kind of imagined orange to taste. And you think, it's like drinking a bit of the sun, it's like, bang, what is this? So you eat better and you exercise more because you're on the beach and it's a very visual culture, and you also feel your IQ just kind of ebbing away slowly. That's the downside of it, but it doesn't matter because you just kind of think, I'm just going to go for a cocktail now. I'm going to go to the beach. So you're in this kind of strange place, you're exercising away, and I got to this. I find gyms quite fascinating places now because in Miami, some of the gyms are like, you've got a DJ playing kind of ambient music, and you're like, whoa, 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 and the DJ's playing this ambient music, maybe slipping in some techno, and you're kind of. And it's so it's almost like and some of them are very posy and cruisy, almost like kind of nightclubs, during the day, and that's what they kind of are. A lot of them, they're sort of almost like kind of singles bars for cruising yuppies who are kind of who are too busy at work to go out at night and kind of meet anybody, but they can take an hour off work during the day and maybe go to the gym. And one of these places I went to, I got fascinated by watching these two women training, and one was obviously the personal trainer, and one was obviously the client. And this woman was just shouting at the other woman, telling her to raise these kind of barbells, and the woman was the other woman that was the client was crying, and I was thinking, "Fuck me, you're paying for this." This is terrible, and I almost kind of had the two characters for the book there. I didn't have to work that hard. You don't have to. As a writer, you're always asking kind of what if questions, like what if this happened, what if that happened, and you're building up a kind of composite of the characters from there. But I didn't really have to because the whole relationship was right down there. Somebody's actually paying for this, and that kind of. It sort of infers a sort of a certain kind of relationship between these people, and I wanted to find out what that relationship was and what kind of boundaries and borders it would have. When you take on a personal trainer, you have to do what they say, but you also have to cede that kind of power to them. It is a bit like kind of that that referent kind of power that the counsellor in Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous has, that you have to submit to this person. The person becomes, in a way, the higher power. And I was also fascinated by the consumerist culture in America, all over the West, but particularly kind of America, and the pressure on women to conform to a certain body image as well, and that was kind of interesting. Pressure on men now too, very much. But the whole idea of the consumerist thing is, it's like that if people are putting on too much weight, they're putting on too much weight because they're eating too much. Other things being equal, and the idea is if you eat too much, just eat less. You know, that's so consume less. But we can't actually let that happen in the sort of world we live in. We can't stop consuming. So you don't consume less. What you do is you substitute with another product. So you buy the fitness membership, or you buy the diet pills, or you buy the liposuction program. You know, you consume to get over this problem. You can't just not consume. So that kind of excuse me, that kind of sort of struck me as well when I was writing the book. And again, I got to that, you know, I get to that thing that I always like the books to be a bit kind of nasty and a bit fucked up, because I like to get people that are having a bad year out. You know, they're not always going to be like that, but you've got to get, when you get them when they're having their bad year out, they start to make all the sort of the terrible decisions. And when people make bad decisions, it's not great for them, but it does make things more interesting and dramatic if you're kind of, it can make things a pain in the arse if you're with them, but it makes things more interesting and dramatic if you're reading about it or you're watching it on the screen. So I kind of set up this scenario whereby this unlikely pair had this kind of strange relationship, and they were basically both under a lot of stress and pressure, and they met each other, and it was a kind of strange kind of folie à deux type of thing. And that's really kind of how I saw the novel, and obviously had the main problems, or the main kind of issues I had with it as a writer was trying to get the American voices right, trying to authenticate the place, and you know, doing a lot of research to try and, you know, getting other people to read it, to try to get that world rendered as accurately as I could. And yeah, so that's about it. So instead of me kind of continually kind of sort of whittering on about it, probably in an accent that a lot of people won't understand, it might be best to turn the questions over to you guys, and if anybody wants to ask me about the book or about anything that I'm involved in, or doing any kind of book or film stuff, please by all means do so, and I'll try to be as evasive as possible.
Okay, most of you, or hopefully most of you, know how this works. Raise your hand, I'll point to somebody, and just be sure to wait for the microphone to come to you so the folks tuning in at home can hear your wonderful question. That gentleman right there first.
So I'm wondering if the piano on the stage there is a segue into a new career opportunity for you.
Yeah, I mean, the piano is, I mean, I'm terrible at every musical instrument. I've just not got, I mean, this has been one of my biggest curses, has been that I've always loved music and I've not been good at it at all. And the piano was actually an instrument that I tried to learn. And I remember when I was a kid, I got sent to piano lessons with this very, very old woman, Mrs. Simpson, her name was, and I didn't tell my parents I was going to these piano lessons because they couldn't afford it, and it was. I'll show you how old this woman was. She said it was a guinea per lesson, and what a guinea, or it was a guinea per month or something, and a guinea is £1, 1 shilling. And, you know, she's probably the last ever person on the planet who used the term guinea, but, so yeah, so I kind of, I ran up this huge tab, taking these secret clandestine piano lessons with this Mrs. Simpson woman, and my parents were horrified because they couldn't afford it when this woman eventually billed them, and she's a very old woman, and so I had to borrow the money from them and get a job, a kind of part-time job, and which was stacking shelves in this grocery to pay off these piano lessons which I took, which were absolutely fucking useless to me because I had almost like kind of no dexterity or touch or musical ear. And you think that I would have learned from that, but I persevered. I tried every other instrument. I tried the trumpet, I tried the guitar, I tried the bass, and it was terrible at them all.
This gentleman right here in the middle.
So speaking of musical ear, as an American reading any of your writing, my perspective really get enamored with this foreign dialect, all the nuances of the accent that you bring out, all these rhythms, cadence, and with this book. And are you doing the same thing basically with your approach to the American accent?
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of tried to sort of there's something that the American accent is much more. I think any accent that's much more orientated towards standard English is basically kind of less performative than it's very much standard English is very much kind of about. It's an imperial language. It's about weights and measures. It's basically a very kind of it's a controlling kind of language, really. So it's not as performative as certain kinds of language. I mean, obviously there's certain cultures in America where language is much more performative, and I've tried to sort of incorporate some of those elements into it without being too kind of sort of ridiculous or doing it for its own sake. I think everything has to come out of the character, and you have to respect that the main characters are kind of white middle class women in Miami Beach, or upper working class, as we would probably call them in Britain, but you call everybody middle class in America. So, so I mean, so I would say that. Yeah, I mean, I've tried, but I've not over-egged it, because you have to respect kind of where they are, and it's always everything you do has to come from character, and you can have as much bad behaviour, as much kind of sort of sex, violence, drugs, kind of explosions, kind of whatever, as long as it's consistent with what the character would do, and the stresses that the character is under. When you see a book that becomes or a film that seems very exploitative to me, it's always because the behaviour isn't in tune with what the character would do, and people can spot that a mile away. And I know myself when I've kind of when I've written something that I'm not happy with, it's not because I've done something that's gratuitous or violent or out there or really kind of that's broken a taboo or something like that. It's because it's not right in terms of that character. It's not quite right in terms of what that character would do.
Cool. The gentleman right there. And then, was there somebody here on this side too? And then that gentleman next.
You shared a little bit about your thoughts and what went into the characters and what brought them to life. Can you share a little bit about your creative process, like what goes into your daily regimen, or when you're brought to the muse, or how that's evolved even over time as you've gotten further along in your career in different mediums?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's like my wife always says to me, like, I never actually see you write, and a book just seems to pop in. And I kind of think I feel as if I never do anything else but write, So one of us is kind of wrong, here, and it's I feel that it's still quite mysterious to me, the process. I don't really, and I know that it changes from project to project. I mean, it's not that I'm consciously kind of trying to reinvent the wheel, but I kind of, if I've done one book and I've kind of I've done a lot of plans and a lot of stuff on the wall. It's like kind of a police office in a crime scene. I just think I can't stand having that on my wall for 6 months. I'm just not going to do anything like that at all the next time. And it's not a plan. It's just an intuitive thing almost. So because I'm not going to do this again, next time I'm going to just sit there and go to my word processor. It's all going to be on there. You're going to see no evidence that I'm doing anything else. I'm just going to write. And they kind of tend to move between something that seems to be very planned and something that seems to be very kind of intuitive. But I think they're always both like that, and to some extent or another. But you're just visualizing it in a different way. But yeah, I mean, I kind of what I tend to do is I'll sit down with. Sometimes I have an idea, and I've got something that I want to write about. It can be a theme, it can be a set of characters, or it can even be the whole story and plot line kind of in my head. Other times I have nothing at all, you know, and I mean, I can think one book like Marabou Stork Nightmares. I knew exactly. I've been thinking about the book for years before I wrote it, and I knew exactly what was going to happen. What I didn't have was people who could, characters who could tell the story. So I had to kind of work and see if I could come out with, design a character that would fit that kind of story. Another one, when I did Glue, I had no idea. I just had the publisher saying, "Look, it's been a couple of years now. When are you going to give us another book?" So I thought I'd better write one now. So I went away and I sort of had these guys sitting in a bar in Munich, just kind of arguing and rapping with each other. And then I thought, what will they be like? Will they still be friends 10 years from now? And then I realised that they weren't friends. I wrote 10 years into the future, and they weren't friends. And I thought, maybe what would be like 10 years back when they were young guys, and then 10 years back again when they were just kids and their families, what would that be like? So I kind of found that novel just through kind of the characters. And sometimes, it's, you kind of, other times, like with both Trainspotting, it was a more thematic thing. I wanted to look at what was going on, with, using my own experiences to look at what was going on with the kind of generation of people that I growing up with in the community that I grew up in, and how things were changing and how things were kind of falling apart. So I think it can come from anywhere, and I think you if your ideas and your motivations come from anywhere, and I think you have to. I know I have to. I wouldn't prescribe this for everybody, but I think you kind of. I find that I have to almost adapt my process to the way that the ideas come to me.
Gentlemen in the Argyle.
First of all, I want to thank you for mentioning Marabou Stork Nightmares, because I wanted to ask you about that book, and I wanted to make sure that I'm pronouncing the title properly. But I grew up in a town that was very much about, like you were talking about, the dichotomy between sports and non-sports people. And so as such, I was somebody from the non-sports world and wasn't involved much in what happened with the Super Bowl this past weekend. However, I became aware through social media of the commercials for the No More movement, and I was wondering what you thought about that, sort of relating to the zero tolerance movement that sort of seemed to have something to do with the basis of that book, Marabou Stork Nightmares, and how violence and sports seem so interrelated in this country and in Great Britain as well.
Well, the NFL has had a terrible year, hasn't it, for all the disclosures and the stuff that's come out there. And I think that one of the terrible things that kind of is that kind of. I think it's to do with the way that the world is in general, but it's to do. I think one of the big problems for the West, and and the America, Britain, and the kind of the threat that we perceive from outsiders is that we kind of militarize our own society, not just in the sort of fetishism we give towards the military, but also with the kind of fetishism we give to kind of sport and aggression, and I think it gives that kind of. It's almost like by doing that, we almost accept the kind of the medievalist agenda of the very regressive kind of forces, the real kind of flat Earth forces, if you like, in the Middle East that are and we implicitly accept that. We implicitly accept that culture of kind of brutality and entitlement and. This is very much right in the centre of my kind of imagination right now, because I'm doing a script about the Crusades, which is a kind of departure from me working in the medieval times, And if you look at the so-called Christian world and the so-called Islamic world, it's very, very similar to the ideology behind it is very, very similar, and it's like, and the behaviour is very, very similar, and I think that we have this thing that, so I think it's very important, I think, in the West that we continue to operate on principles of science, basically, and principles of knowledge, rather than faith-based principles. To think kind of that our great legacy to the world wasn't religion, it wasn't Christianity. Our great legacy to the world is science and technology. That's what kind of basically it's not Christianity that's is the reason that we're different from the Islamic world, if you like, in the Middle East. It's basically it's science and technology, and that's been our kind of gift to ourselves and our gift to the world. And I think that we have to continue to kind of evolve. We have to continue to grow, and we have to continue to accept that as our future, rather than kind of celebrating brutality in any of its forms.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, we'll get this gentleman here and then over there.
Thanks. Okay, so it sounds like you found some of your characters in Miami, but I was wondering if there was another reason you thought Miami was a good setting for your book, just the whole mess of Miami. So.
Yeah, I mean Miami's just weird. People have been to Miami here, right? Because everybody goes, from here. But it's kind of strange. I mean, basically because it's a very visual culture, and it's a very kind of there's a lot of affluence. There's a lot of people kind of hanging around all these kind of high-end sort of cocktail bars and nightclubs, and there's a lot of kind of whoa, spring break kind of stuff going on as well. And there's a lot of all these kind of weirdos that kind of the kind of sexual predators from all over the place that just pile off there because there's all this naked flesh on show, basically, So it is a kind of there's people from all over. There's people from all over the United States come there. People from kind of Central America, Latin America, the South America, the Caribbean. So it's kind of it is almost like it's a new kind of Ellis Island. Basically, it's a new place where it's a point of embarkation for new Americans, and it's got this incredibly kind of unformed vibe about it. That it's almost forming before your eyes. Basically, it's like they're actually starting to get a downtown in Miami now for the first time. This kind of it seems to be crystallizing into a kind of proper city as well as just as a collection of beach towns. So it's an exciting place to be for a writer. I mean, if you look at the great cities in the north of America, like Philadelphia, Chicago, where I live, Boston, they've got there's so much tradition there. It feels to me now very much like British cities. It feels like kind of sort of Liverpool and Glasgow and Edinburgh and Manchester, and there's all these traditions, kind of cultural traditions, literary traditions. I mean, I feel that when I go to if I try to write about Chicago, it just doesn't really come to me the same because it's there's people there that do it better. They're just steeped in the whole thing. Whereas I feel that kind of my view of Miami is as good as anybody else's. It's just kind of got off the plane or got off the boat. So I feel that, and it's so different from where I come from, because where I come from, Scotland's a very kind of oral culture. The whole Celtic oral storytelling tradition is very much about kind of talking and sort of telling stories and sort of whereas Miami's a very visual culture. It's all about it's all about the beach. It's all about art. It's all about photography. It's all about the style and glamour, the Condé Nast shoots and all that, and because of the light. So it's just it's a very interesting contrast of a place, and it's very stimulating for me as a writer to come from a completely different environment and to write about something like that.
Over here.
Hello. At what age did you decide to make the commitment to writing as a full-time venture? And also, what were the factors that drove you to that, the influences?
The factors were, it was basically kind of, as I've alluded to with music, but also with other things, it was just serial failure and everything else that I tried to do. You know, I mean, I kind of thought that I always wanted to do something creatively, because I thought that, you know, you look at kind of, I looked at musicians and I looked at, you know, artists painting, and I thought, this is great. You know, these guys can do this without having to get a proper job, you know, like kind of work in a factory or work in the docks. And I thought, this would be great to be able to do that for a living, you know. So the fear of actually getting a proper job was a massive motivating force for me. But I kind of tried to get, music was the one that I kind of put all my eggs in the basket, and it didn't come off. But what I did get from it was that I would write these songs, I would write ballads, which kind of basically are just stories, you know, and you know, they're stories set to song. And I thought, well, the songs are pretty crap, but the stories are actually quite good. Maybe I should just stick with the stories instead. So the stories kind of like, were almost like kind of poems that grew out of songs, and you know, from poems that turned into stories, from stories that turned into me getting to the point where I'd kind of, I was pushing 30. I was just, it was 29, and I was pushing 30, and I thought, I've got to write a novel before I'm 30, and I didn't. I mean, I think it was about, I think I finished it when I was 31, and it got published when I was 33. So it was really it was the last throw of the dice, basically, for me to do anything creatively in that way. You know, I thought that what I would probably end up doing would be facilitating the creativity of other people, you know. So I thought that I would, I'd probably run kind of music clubs or do promotions or promote bands and stuff, which I started to do. But I didn't really think, I think that was my last chance to do something creative myself, and it kind of grew out of that. But I didn't so much want to be a writer as I wanted to do something that didn't result in me having a proper job. I didn't think I could be a writer because you don't really think, the household I grew up in, it wasn't, you know, there was books around, but because it was a small apartment block in a project, there's not, you know, there's not places to store books. It's not kind of stuff with books on walls and all that. So when you don't come from that culture, you don't really think it's viable. You know, especially in Britain, you know, I always thought that kind of writers were posh guys that were kind of lived in big stately homes and had a sort of like Brideshead Revisited, you know, and they had the library full of books, and they sort of sat with tweeds on and drank gin and discussed kind of literature, and then maybe sat at a desk with a quill, and I thought, this isn't going to really work for me, like, you know. But I mean, I was surprised that I kind of I took to it really well, and it felt, in a sense, it felt when I was writing that first book and I was sitting down and doing it, it kind of felt like coming home. You know, I had this amazing sense that I'd actually arrived and I was doing what I actually was supposed to be doing. After many kind of false starts, I'd actually found what I was kind of basically supposed to do. You know, if it's, you know, what I was kind of maybe, you know, meant to do. So yeah, so it was a kind of I would have got to it eventually just through the process of exhausting everything else, but I'm glad that I got to it when I did.
Who else has a question? Anybody in the back? This gentleman right here. And if anybody's disappointed, writers with smoking jackets, brandy snifters, and quills will be here next week.
As somebody who writes about social and political relationships and the relationships of the characters in your world, having written since the 90s versus now, what kind of impact has technology had on you as a writer since Trainspotting versus this current book?
Yeah, I mean, I think it. I mean, what happened with? I mean, I got into screenwriting basically through Trainspotting. I'd always been very into films, probably more into film than I was into books. Certainly at some point, and I got the opportunity sort of came from me to get into that world, and I kind of, you know, and it's nice because it's very frustrating because it's very hard to get a movie made, particularly an independent movie, but it's it's good because you're working with real people, you know, as opposed to if you're a writer, if you're doing novels, you're working with people that don't really exist all the time, which is madness, basically. So it's good working with real people, but the frustration is that you're working with real people. You know, you're getting you're getting kind of, you can't tell them what to do all the time. They just, you know, they don't respond to that. So it's that, you know, you get red pens. You know, it's when you get when you hand in a script, you know, you'll get some guy who can't fucking write his name. You know, he can barely write a check, and that's all he needs to do. But because he's the producer, he'll kind of put a red pen through about 3 scenes that you've written and say, that doesn't work, rewrite that, or get rid of that scene and all that, you know. And you think, fuck's sake, you know. I mean, if somebody tried to do that when I was writing the book, I would kind of put the knife through their hand as they were putting the red pen mark there. But you just do accept it's a different discipline, it's a different set of relationships, and you do have to kind of think of it very differently. You have to put your ego in check, and you have to be more prepared to collaborate. And I think that, you know, the technology kind of, for me, is like, there's a guy in Scotland that he won the Booker Prize a few years back, a guy called George Mackay Brown, a very, very old guy, and he lives in Orkney, which is one of the far north islands of Scotland, and he never leaves Orkney. He calls Orkney the mainland, and Scotland the island, you know, and Britain is the island. He never leaves Orkney, and he refused to leave to pick up the Booker Prize. And he's still there. I mean, this was about 10 years ago, and it was really ancient then, but he's still kind of at it now. And when he writes, he kind of he gets 3 biro pens, which are just what you guys would probably call Sharpies, but a really cheap, tacky, tawdry version of a Sharpie. Not a kind of sort of flowing felt ink pen, but just a really horrible, scrapey kind of thing. And he writes, he reckons that when he empties those 3 pens, which they cost about kind of not even 5 cents, about 4 cents each, and that when he gets rid of those 3 pens, he's done the novel basically, and he sends it to this woman that he's always given it to type it out, and then he sends it off to his publisher. And I thought, God, I mean, how can you write longhand now? You know, I've lost the skill of handwriting. I can't. I had to sort of write a little note if I have to write a little note, a thank you note for a Christmas present and all that, you know, to so and so from Irvine, it just looks like a mess. So, but he does all that, and when you look at some of the great works of fiction, you know, and you look at, you know, like kind of some of the, you know, these big kind of thick kind of books that, you know, the Brontes and George Eliot and all that kind of wrote, you think, how the fuck did they do that? You know, it just seems absolutely bizarre that you could do that, you know. So then I think to myself, well, you know, when I was at school, I used to write, maybe I could write 10 pages, kind of sort of longhand. I could write 10 pages of an essay at college and all that. It's just impossible now, you know. It's crazy, and you have to do all these corrections. I mean, so yeah. I mean, so I think that, you know, in that basic level, I think with filmmaking as well, you know, it's like you can kind of digital has changed so much. It's changed everything, you know. It's like, and you can actually, if I go to my agent at CAA in Hollywood with a script and say, you know, who can you get involved in this? Who can you get attached to that? You know, they just look at it and go, this is there's no way. You know, you have to go and make this yourself. You know, phone up some dentists and see if you can get them to contribute. You know. So you kind of, you know, but you can make a fun, you know, you think this is just going to be a fun little film that nobody's going to make any money of, you know, we're going to do it for the love of it. Then you round up your friends and you say, do you fancy doing this? And they go, oh, fuck, we're not going to get paid, are we? And you go, well, no. But you can actually do it. You know, you actually can kind of, if you can get enough people that have got enough proper jobs to sustain themselves, you can actually make a movie now. Which is, I think it's quite fantastic. that that can happen. Nobody's going to watch it. Nobody's going to ever see it. The production values will be terrible. It'll be, but you can actually do it. And I think that's great.
More questions. It's been a male-dominated Q&A so far. Any questions from the what?
Hello.
Hi there.
Is there any one character that you can relate to the most, or that's the most like you out of any of your books?
Well, I think it's funny because when I kind of started writing, I thought that Renton was the character most like me because of Trainspotting being my first book, and they reckon that the first book is always the most autobiographical, and Renton was the character who had the most airtime, and he seemed to be a bit like me, like a younger version of me, and and it's strange, but that when this book, the Sex Life of Siamese Twins, when the first person I showed the manuscript to was my wife, because she's the kind of the same age basically as Lucy, and I showed her and she's American, so I thought, and she's a woman, so I thought I'll get her to read this, and she read it and she goes, those two characters, like Lucy and Lena, are more like you than any other characters you've ever written. And that kind of completely blindsided me, because I thought that, no, I mean, they're women, they're younger, they're Americans, so they're not going to be like me at all. But she reckons that I'm a combination, an absolute 50-50 combination of those two characters, which is kind of really unsettling for me, But I think there's certain. I think in some ways, when you write a character, you kind of you put bits of yourself in them all. Basically, you're trying to look outwards, and you're trying to kind of compose them from, and you are composing them from different material and different people that you know, different people that you know, but they're all in some ways kind of repressed, hopefully repressed, and the nuttier ones like Begbie and all that. But you're kind of, in some ways, they're all repressed elements of you.
And
so
thank God he didn't say Begbie. Other questions? Yes, here in the front.
Thanks. How long were you living in the States before you felt ready to set a book in the States?
Let me see. It's kind of weird because I've been here kind of solidly for 5 years, but we had a place over here for about 10 years. So I've been kind of coming back and forward for a decade basically, and I've been here solidly for 5. But so I don't know. I mean, I think that I wanted to. I mean, I wrote about Miami about 5 years ago in a novel called Crime, but it was a Scottish character. I think it's taken me till now to feel really comfortable about writing American characters, but I kind of quite liked the idea of setting. I mean, I've done a few stories with short stories with American characters, but you can get away with a lot with the short story. You can you don't really need to get too deep into the character. It is about the beginning, middle, and end of the story. So yeah, it's taken a while. It's taken about a good 5 years to feel that that I'm kind of in some ways, I think you can go to a different place and you can get the culture of it on a very superficial level and think that you understand it. And it's taken me till now to actually start to understand America. And I mean, I still don't completely understand it, but it's taken me a while to get past that kind of superficiality about it, I think.
On the opposite side of the coin, do you feel there are American writers who write about Britain or specifically Scotland that you appreciate?
It's not a massive kind of point of interest for American writers to write about Scotland. There was a guy, God, I forget his name. There was a guy who was an American guy with a Scottish name, obviously kind of Scottish American guy, but very nice guy, and he wrote a great book back in the 90s. He was, I can't even remember the guy's name, but he wrote this great book. It was a very kind of kitschy kind of sort of send-up of Scotland and about of the Scottish tourist industry. But I think that's about the only one I can think of.
Other questions, please. Right here.
How do you feel about the film adaptations of your books, and how big of a part did you have in making them?
Well, I mean, kind of, I mentioned Ecstasy and the disaster that we had about the accents, which was a shame because it was such a good film. And we were going to shoot it in Scotland, and then we ran out of money. So we had to shoot it in Toronto, and actually sort of just outside Toronto, basically. So we were hamstrung a bit because we got so much money from Canada, and we wouldn't have been able to shoot it otherwise. But I think it's still a good film. It was almost a really great film, though, and that was a shame that that didn't work out that way. Yeah, I mean, Trainspotting obviously is the most successful one commercially, and it had a great, it was Danny Boyle, such a superb visual stylist, and he had a great, fantastic cast, and so that was obviously a great thing for me personally. The Acid House was a good film. It's kind of a triptych of different stories. It wasn't really meant to be a theatrical movie, but it became one just on the back of Trainspotting, really. But the one that I kind of really like is the one that's not been seen so much over here. It didn't get the release I felt it should have got in America, because the American sales agent didn't kind of work the way that with us the way that they should have done, really. So it fell through the cracks. But we did Filth last year, which I don't know if people got a chance to see it, but if you haven't, check it out, because James McAvoy is absolutely amazing in it. He's absolutely mental, and you can get it on demand. And it's so sad that it didn't get a proper release here, because it just did incredible box office in the UK and in Europe, and we did really well with it. And I was looking forward to thinking that it was going to really kind of kick off big time in America, especially with James as a lead man, and given which I think is, he's a really great actor, but I think this is, it's a performance of a lifetime for him. So I would urge people, if you can, get it on demand and check it out, because it, even if you don't particularly like the book or you don't like the main character, you'll see a fantastic actor absolutely given the performance of his lifetime. So I've been happy with them so far. We've got another couple that are kind of, scheduled to be done at some point. So I'm hoping that they'll work out too.
Okay, we have time for just one more question, and we will go back to the middle right here.
So I first realized that you were living in the States when I was seeing your hilarious Blackhawks related tweets on Twitter. I was wondering if you draw a parallel between your embracing and growing love for American sports and getting more attuned to the American voice.
Yeah, I think it's I think what happens is that I've always tried to, everywhere I've gone, every different sort of town that I've lived in, and I've lived in quite a few now, I've always kind of taken an interest in a local sports team. I think you really find a way of getting into the kind of soul of the place in some ways by doing that, and I think it has been great for me. I mean, I go to a lot of baseball during the baseball season, and I go to the hockey games when I can get tickets and when I'm in town, and not so much basketball and not so much NFL, but certainly baseball and hockey are the two ones that I'm really kind of a sort of vibe on in America. And to me, it's like there's something about. You get a lot. I know a lot of kind of expat Brits that have been here for years and all that, and they've never been to a baseball game, and they say, "Oh, fuck baseball, man. I'm gonna watch a bit of football on the TV, So, but I think how can you actually say you've been to America until you've been to a baseball game? You know, there's something incredibly, you know, a nice hot summer's day, you go in and there's something, you see the picture on the mound and all, and I'm not, you know, but there is something kind of very quintessentially American and something quite kind of magical that only happens here about that, you know, that experience. And I think if you don't at least kind of try to engage with that, you're not really engaging with the place that you're in.
Okay, everybody, when you go home tonight, you should watch Filth. It is streaming on Netflix. Plug there. And but two things before you do. One, join us upstairs for a book signing. And two, join me in thanking Irvine Welsh.
Thank you very much for coming along, folks. I know it's very, very cold outside, so I appreciate you coming along, keeping me company. Cheers.